Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the General Purposes Committee meeting to order. May I have a motion on the minutes? Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor, opposed, carried. First item is the Phoenix Net Law. Designated speaker is Rebecca Clark, and asking for endorsement to guide us into the next phase of planning. So, Rebecca, what's to add to your report?
To the chair, I have nothing further to add, but I am available to answer questions if needed.
All right. All right. Someone want to put this on the floor then? So it's moved and seconded.
So moved.
So it's moved and seconded. Oops, someone's not muted. Now they are. Okay, so we've got a couple questions here. Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question relates to an email that Mayor Council got the other day about the Richmond Arts Coalition. Just a quick question, perhaps. I know this is about the stakeholders for Phase 1, and the list of the groups is on Attachment 1, GP15, and there's 16 groups. Is the Richmond Arts Council and the Richmond and ACE, the Advisory Committee on the Environment, are those two in Phase 2?
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, the current list of stakeholders for Phase 1 were identified in conjunction with the identified intended use as a museum-style interpretive center. As we move forward, new stakeholders will be identified that align with future program options.
Thank you. If I may just follow up, then I would definitely support making an amendment to this list and adding those two in Phase 1, because if I picture a museum exhibits in the future, they're going to be about the environment and they're going to be some artist's rendition. So I really think those should be included in this list. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't think we have to actually make that as an amendment. Staff have that kind of a direction. So then we'll go to Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Worship, through the chair. Thank you for this, and I think that there's a lot of exciting things that can happen here. And now, sort of following on to what Councillor Wolf was saying, the arts isn't sort of precluded by any of the things that's in the guiding principles of this. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Liu, the guiding principles do not preclude that. However, current direction from Council is to be looking at a museum-style interpretive center.
Okay.
Well, I take it that given the reaction that the idea of a museum received by our stakeholders, I take it that we're back out to a general consultation.
To the chair, that is certainly an option that we can pursue if Council were to direct us to do so.
Well, what do you need by way of direction to do? Go in that direction. I mean, you see what the report, what I hear, what it says, the Richmond Museum, like the one that's at the Arts and Culture Center, they're saying that that's not what's on. That's what the feedback you've gotten, and you say that that there was a consensus on that. But you know, an interpretive center, an estuarium, you know, those kind of things, roughly speaking, are museum or museum-like. Right?
Yes, to the chair, a museum-style interpretive center would encompass a number of things. It does not encompass an art gallery or makerspace type facility, which has been discussed in the past, and we would need new direction from Council to revisit those options. And I'll leave it with my director, Marie Fenwick, if she'd like to add anything further to that.
Yes, through the chair, I think nothing further to add. I think some of the original concepts that we look back over the past number of years, for example, artist studio spaces, If you would like us to pursue considering that option again, we have done some work in that area, and that certainly can be considered. I think with the direction that we're on right now, most contemporary interpretive spaces would have a variety of uses, so things like restaurant opportunities for the arts, but something very specific like artist studio space for the building would not be considered under the current direction that we are pursuing.
Okay, what direction would you need to make it a general type of approach? Because I think that that's what the report is saying, that's what's justified.
Should council choose to have us consider artist studio spaces or a maker space, I think a referral to that effect would provide the opportunity to open up the range of options that we pursue going forward.
I'll make that referral.
Okay, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm kind of at a loss to know. I thought to endorse it, we were being asked to endorse the guiding principles, and that would encompass the flavor of the report. And what I hear staff saying is, no, you're still restricted to this idea of a museum. And I don't get that from the report, and I don't get that from the tenor of the feedback that I'm getting. So maybe the answer is to refer it back for staff to consider what directions you would need to make to make it a wider type of observation and investigation. I don't think that has to be a very complex situation. I think you're most of the way there. I just feel at a loss to try and guess how we can give you that direction and make it complete and accurate and exactly what you're looking for. So anyway, we can come back to that. Councillor McNulty.
Thank you, Worship. It's a good report from once it came, but I would have to agree with the previous speakers, not understanding totally what a museum-style interpretive center is. And unfortunately, I thought when we were coming back, this would be also a community building, Your Worship, with changing needs in the community. And I thought we were going to have that kind of report with options. I don't think we need to refer it back, Your Worship. I think we have to give direction. I think there's general consultation to the community, but I'd like to know what our needs are at the moment. And if we need, I'd like to see opportunities for the arts there as well. I think it could be a multi-purpose. Museum or museum activities are in the eyes of the beholder with what you set up, whether it's static or active or whatever you're going to come up with. And we haven't necessarily even decided on that. So I think we need to do a little bit more work. I think we can interpret, if you wish, and shift the guiding principles or add another one or two to it. But I would like to see us and staff come back with what is needed in the community. What are we hearing out there? And that doesn't mean to say we can't have a principal dedication of a building, but we also have to look at what we're actually building. From the salvaging aspect, it didn't look like we were able to gain too much. So I think we'll be building a brand new building. And if we're going to build a brand new building, let's step outside the box and try to ascertain what needs we can put in there, as well as meet some of the goals that we had originally. So I think a clause, Your Worship, to staff to go back and come back with not only the arts, etc. I'd put down and other. What is the other potential that's there that we're not thinking about at the moment, that we're handing in with these, 8 pages of a report? So that's where I would come from, and I'd make that motion once we've heard everybody to speak.
Thus, the need for a referral from what you say. Anyway, Councillor Steves.
Yeah, thanks. This is the first time I heard of having art studios. I thought the arts thing would be an open area where artists would be able to have art shows and things like that, but not individual studios. My thoughts on it, however, are that we should be combining this building with the First Nations House. And the First Nations House is a logical place to have artists' shows and studios and stuff like that. And be actually zeroing in on native art, but also make it into an arts center. And you wouldn't need the arts in the main building, the Phoenix Gillnet Loft, except for if you had a big open area where you had your shows. And my thoughts are that the existing Gillnet Loft, we should put museum stuff in there because we got a lot of stuff in storage we aren't showing yet, and take that open space that's there and have the open space in the Phoenix Gillnet Loft, the newer building, where you could have art shows on and maybe even the farmers markets on Fridays and on weekends and things like that. But it seems to me the art should be reserved for the First Nations House, and anyway, that's my thoughts on it. But I certainly support the motion going ahead. I don't know why we can't discuss these things without proceeding. I do have a question, however. When we adopted this a year or so ago, we were told that if we didn't take the building down and rebuild it right away, that the cost would go up, and I thought it would be reconstructed by now. And if we didn't keep on delaying it, what's happening to our contract?
Through the chair to Councillor Steves, yes, the deconstruction is complete, and the project rebuilding the facility remains on hold until we actually have a confirmed program. For us to commence reconstructing the building can place the city in a much more difficult financial situation, having to retrofit a shell of the building and converting it to something like a museum or an interpretive arts center at a later date.
Okay, I didn't think we were going to convert it to a museum according to this report, or an interpretive arts center.
Through the chair to Councillor Steves, yes, I just use those as examples. Whatever the direction that council gives to staff, what the building might finally be, potentially would cost significantly more if we were to do a retrofit of a shell building that was reconstructed.
Okay, I don't understand that, because most of the things we would want to have in there wouldn't require reconstruction.
Through the chair to Councillor Steves, yes, if there was no reconstruction involved, then certainly we would complete the project as funded by council previously.
So if we refer it again, it means we have to let the bid out again?
Through the chair to Councillor Steves, if we were to complete the building and just reconstruct the Phoenix Loft as it was before, we already have funding from council, and we would proceed based on that amount of funding.
But if we keep on referring it, what's going to happen?
Through the chair to Councillor Steves, if it gets referred back to staff, clearly we are in a time of volatility for construction and design, and it's likely that the costs for construction will continue to increase.
Okay, I'd like to suggest then that we adopt the staff report and have the arts and the other things as part of the discussion without referring it back. In other words, so to indicate we're proceeding, and if there's any major changes, we can probably they're not going to reconstruct it tomorrow. So,
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to add to Mr. Young's response as well through to Councillor Steves. Just to clarify, we have completed the contract, as Mr. Young noted, on the deconstruction. There is no outstanding procurement or contract on the reconstruction. So we are waiting to have a defined program, completed design, and then at that point we would procure construction.
Okay, I thought we were told a year ago that the bid was for the complete reconstructed, complete reconstruction, not just the deconstruction. I thought the bid was for everything.
The full project cost estimate, yes, was for reconstruction of a shell space. And Mr. Young can probably correct me, but I believe that was the $30 million. But that was the estimate for construction, not a procurement of construction services.
So in other words, we have no idea what it's going to cost us if we carry on doing what we're doing.
Through the chair to Councillor Steves, we do very detailed, extensive cost estimates and testing with both contractors and design professionals to ensure we're as accurate as possible with our cost estimations. And that includes escalation for a potential future construction date based on the general timelines of program approval and design. Having said all that, yes, of course, until you actually procure and have a contract, you don't have a firm price. And over the last few years and going forward, yes, we certainly are projecting that cost escalation is going to continue to occur.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that because I understood we had a firm price.
My recollection of the situation was that it was a couple $1 million to deconstruct and to preserve what we could. The total cost of the reconstruction as is was $19 million, but council in its wisdom added on the condition that there would be a museum, which added $14 million to the bill, thereby necessitating us to make sure that before it goes ahead, we have to know exactly, well, at least generally what's going to be there, because we don't have $14 million for a museum down on the waterfront. Councillor McPhail.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to staff for the report. And continuing on from Your Worship, as you remember the discussion in 2020, so staff were given a very narrow direction of, and a concept was proposed, and there had been no community consultation beforehand. So staff have done their work, and what has come back is that there is no clear consensus in the community. And I would agree with some of the comments that we need to look at what are options available to us, what are possibilities. So I would agree with it. It needs a referral back to staff to look at more general and multi-use options for this building. We need to really engage with the community again, because it seems that there are many ideas out there, but no real consensus on a direction forward. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, through the chair. Well, thank you for the report and the information contained in it. I didn't have the privilege or the burden, maybe, of going through previous deliberations about the building. So I did go through the consultation process, though, and I do want to thank staff for that, because it was very extensive. And although perhaps there are a couple of groups that weren't in that part, I understand they'll be in the next stage. So just a couple of questions and maybe a couple of comments on it. I mean, I understand the main ask here is an endorsement of the guiding principles. Just one quick comment on the Ministry of Forests and Lands and Natural Resources and Operations. I think that is, and I know it's pointed on the report, that is a huge, I think, task to be completed, is to find out, what we're actually going to be allowed to do there. And I think before we ask that question, we have to know what it is we're asking permission to do there. And so that we do have to have clarity, I think, when we talk to the ministry. The other quick comment and a question you probably can't answer right now, but when this is all said and done, my understanding from the community is the expectation is that this will become part of the National Historic Site at Britannia. And kind of a rhetorical question, so you don't need to comment on it, but what that means is it has to fit in with everything else that is happening at Britannia, I think, in a cohesive way. So one question I did have on the guiding principles on page 13 was, when you talk about highly interactive, I start thinking of Disneyland and stuff for highly interactive. So can you just explain what highly interactive means? What's an example of that, like a zip line over to Shady Island or something? And also, to me, that sounds like it's more expensive too, so there might be a money component to being more highly interactive.
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, highly interactive could mean many things. Certainly, local examples would include Science World, the aquarium, children's museums are highly interactive. Some of the interactives at the Richmond Olympic Experience might be examples locally we could point to. It can include a range of things. They do often increase the costs, both the capital outset costs as well as the ongoing operating costs.
Okay, thanks, and that does sound like an attractive option if it can be done. Also on page 13 in the guiding principles, and the guiding principles, when I read them, sounded pretty open. So I didn't realize it was so constricted based on previous direction, but to me that sounds like it's pretty open, but that's my interpretation of it, and I'm probably wrong. So, but when you talk about not duplicating what's offered at other sites, I understand you don't want to totally replicate something or duplicate something, but you know, part of the Britannia site, it is a living museum, it is a historic site, and everything is interconnected. So to me, there is overlap, because overlap means connectivity and making things flow. So I guess that you're not precluding overlap and connectivity, you're just talking about no sheer reproduction of something somewhere else, like at London Farm.
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, I would say duplication applies mainly in terms of the types of stories or experiences that we're providing. It doesn't preclude an experience that would work in complement to other things we have in Steveston, whether that's at Britannia or other sites as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, Councillor Au.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you very much for the report, and I basically agree with the guiding principles as on page 13. But just to pick up on the last point being raised by Councillor Hobbs, you know, I also feel that the so-called duplication should not be interpreted very strictly, because, you know, we might have similar programs elsewhere, but perhaps we need more of that. So, I mean, for example, we talk about artist studios. So I think that could be, you know, something we already have in some areas of the city, but we might need to have more. So I think, yes, generally, you know, we don't want to duplicate, but I don't think we should interpret this very strictly. And also, for the fourth point, highly interactive and dynamic experiences. Again, I don't want that to be meant by very high-tech, artificial. Instead, I like this place to be more natural and to keep it, you know, as natural as possible. Now, having said that, I agree with most of the comments being made by Councillor Steves. Especially, I would agree that this site should be planned, incorporated with the First Nations bunkhouse, you know, for programming and for the activities being planned for. So I think the two places probably should be considered as connected. And I also want to say that I don't want to have too many programs, you know, in the site. Instead, I would like this to be a place flexible enough to accommodate a number of activities. For example, it can be an open space for farmers market, outdoor artists events, exhibitions, and even for performances. So I think probably instead of trying to put too many things onto this site and make it very restrictive, I would rather have it to be more natural, open, flexible, and that could fit a number of events. Thank you.
Councillor Day. Your mute's on.
Sorry about that. I agree with Councillor Au. I think that the space should be a large space that's a gathering place for all kinds of activities. And an interpretive center, an educational center, that should be all about the Fraser River. It's on the Fraser River. It's in the Fraser River. So my question to staff is, why could we not build the shell, make sure we have all the plumbing and electrical roughed in, so that if we do decide to host, you know, a restaurant, or if I do decide to have extra, you know, bathrooms, plumbing, whatever, that we would be able to do that? Like, why could we not build the shell, rough in all the stuff that we think we might need, and then see how the building adapts over time.
Through the chair to Councillor Day, certainly staff are in a position, based on funding received from council, to rebuild and build the shell of the building. And we certainly could, at council direction, install all the roughed-in services. The challenge by proceeding that way is we don't know what the program is desired at this point in time. And if that program requires extensive reconstructions or reconfiguring of the interior space, that potentially could cost significantly more money in the long run. The most cost-effective way for us to proceed with reconstructing the shell of the building is to understand what the program that council directs the staff to deliver. We would complete our design, and by completing that design with a known program, we will know where to put the pipes in the right place and the various things in the correct location.
Through the chair to Councillor Day, just to add to what Mr. Young was saying, each of the options or ideas that have been put forward, and in particular the highly interactive ones, will require special fit out of the facility. And to do that retroactively could be quite challenging depending on what the program option that is finally determined to be ends up.
Okay, so if we just adapt it slightly, the guiding principles, in other words, take out highly interactive, but leave pretty much everything else, could we build a shell?
Staff direction is to use it as a museum. And what they're saying is, if we want these other things, then we should identify them at this point. So that's why it's counterproductive to just have a shell of a building if you're going to build a museum. So
No, I accept that. Just one last question, and it says on GP 12 that the feedback in phase 1 through the engagement with, and you had 65 responses from individuals and 15 stakeholder groups. The feedback was mixed. Do you think it's necessary to go back and ask these questions again? But maybe before we do that, we find out what the provincial and federal governments will allow us to do. There's no point in finding something that they're simply going to say no to.
Through the chair to Councillor Day, my understanding is that it's not so much that they will say yes or no, it's that the process will differ depending on what the option is, the program option that we are proposing. And without an understanding on their end of what we may like to do, it will be challenging for them to identify the proper process for us. And so it's, different options may have, may take longer time, may be more expensive to implement. But I'm not sure at this stage that going to the province would mean taking any ideas off the table.
Okay, so that's good news. Thank you.
all right. Before I get into what I think the direction should be, in the list of stakeholders, Richmond School District number 38 teachers, why wouldn't it be to the Richmond School District number 38, period? Or is that
to the chair.
Is that a typo?
To the chair, we consulted with a group of teachers who have historically attended field trips at the museum and heritage sites, who have a specific interest in that type of facility.
Wouldn't you also consult with the trustees?
Through the chair, certainly this is something that we would do going forward.
Okay, so going back to a couple of the questions, to make my point, which I tried to make at the beginning, right now, as staff says, all their consultations are heading towards a museum use. And what I see in the report and what I hear from council is the wish to have a far more flexible type of use, which could have some museum aspects, but wouldn't necessarily be museum. And so so it's hard for us to give those kind of directions, in my opinion, without being properly focused and organized. So I think that we should refer this back to staff, and I suggest that the referral would be to propose recommendations for further directions and options for general and multi-use flexible programming, such as for community needs, arts and artists, First Nation interpretation, farmers and artisans markets, performance space, and other possibilities. Does that seem reasonable? Okay, so that's moved and seconded. So in addressing this, I just want to emphasize, I think staff has done a really good job of giving us the feedback. But I think that if we gave a specific direction which was controversial at the time, and it sounds like after the examination in the stakeholders, it's pointing a different direction, and council has been reflecting that. So I think that we need to kind of get it organized, come back, and go forward. It's a very large item that we're dealing with. All right? So on the referral, then I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. Okay, that was a good discussion. The next one is the soil used for the placement of fill application, et cetera, on River Road. On this one, we have, I'm not sure that they want to make a submission, but at least to answer any questions. You've got the note of who's here: Harry Sahota, the property owner, Daniel Lamhanwa from the Drone Environmental. It's not Daniel, but it's Matt Kokan from Geo Pacific. They're available at least for questions, and maybe we could ask them is there anything they want to add to the report. In fact, let's ask staff. Is there anything you want to add to the report?
To the chair, I have nothing further to add, and I'm ready for questions.
All right. So to the various delegations, do you want to add anything, or are you just here to answer questions? Depending on what arises.
I have nothing to add to Drone Environmental's report. I'm here for questions. Thank you.
Okay. And I see the Sahotas are here also to answer questions. Just nod your head if that's the case. Okay.
Yes, I would like to read a statement if I could.
Okay, I'll come back to you. And Mr. Kokan, did you have anything besides just being available for questions? Are we seeing him? Is he here? Sorry? Okay, it sounds like he is logged off. Okay, we will go to Harry Sahota. You have a statement you want to read to us.
Yes, please. Good afternoon, members of the General Purpose Committee. My name is Harinder Harry Sahota, and I'm the landowner of the subject property on River Road. Today, I'm here with my son Harj, as my technical support, to speak briefly about our plan for the property and to answer any questions to the committee might have. I'm the son of a farmer, and until I immigrated to Canada in 1970, working on our family farm was a major part of my life. In 1970, purchasing a farm in Canada wasn't a possibility for my family, so I had to follow other avenues. I believe that my early experiences in our family farm helped instill values of hard work, responsibility, and patience, values that I have since applied to my career in construction industry. For the past 25 years, a major part of my work has been conducted in Richmond, and during that period, I began to feel a special connection to the community. In 2008, what seemed to be a dream in 1970 became a reality, and I purchased the River Road property with the intentions of establishing a small farm for my family and I to enjoy. Since purchasing the property, I have come up against obstacles that have made it challenging to get the farm operational. To begin, the crossing to the property was in such poor condition that it could only bear weight of light vehicles. Replacing the crossing was a major project for me, and it significant expenses like engineering, construction, rerouting of drainage canals, and consulting with fisheries. In 2019, the crossing was completed, and I could finally bring equipment in to start clearing the vegetation from years of inactivity. I started to clear the vegetation on my land, however, quickly realized that the conditions were too wet to support the equipment, let alone farm crops or do anything useful. Throughout most of the fall and into the spring, there are deep pools of water that go above my knees to make even walking around my land a challenge. I considered options such as digging a drainage ditch. However, after visual inspection and measuring grades, I saw that the water had nowhere to go because of the higher ground around the property, especially my neighbors to the west. That is when I hired a professional hydrologist and an engineer to help me with the drainage issue. After extensive consultation with the professionals, I've come to the understanding that the best solution for making my land farmable is importing soil. I do realize that bringing in a small amount of soil to raise the land and improve drainage is a lengthy and costly process. However, I want to do everything that I can to be able to use my land for its zoned purposes. I am fully committed to this property and serious about farming and land after soil has been brought in. I am open and willing to continue working with the city and with Madrone Environmental to complete the soil project. Once the soil project is complete, I will be acting as the main operator for proposed farm where I intend to grow garlic. I will do my best to be able to responsible steward of my land and continue to the community of Richmond or contribute to the community of Richmond. At this point, I just need help to bring my land to the point where my family and I can start growing. Thank you for your cooperation. Please let me know if you have any questions.
All right, thank you. So we'll just go for comments or questions. Councilor McNulty.
I don't have of the applicant. I do of staff.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for a most comprehensive report. I appreciate that. They're asking permission for us to send it to the Agricultural Land Commission, which I have no problem on. On our page 19, there's 3 lines there in the 3rd paragraph down. And my question is, will the applicant have to follow, as I always come back, the Kavanaugh guidelines, where any soil brought in will be supervised and documented?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, yes, that is the case. The applicant will be following the Kavanaugh guidelines.
And then, so in essence, this application, if approved by the ALC, will be under the city's perusal and not the ALC.
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, the fulfillment of those conditions and guidelines will be under the purview of city staff.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Day.
Yep. Thank you very much. I had a question of staff as well. My question was, is the reason the soil has to be brought in because of neighboring properties? So Mr. Sahota has just said that that's exactly the situation. Is there a way to put in proper drainage ditches to make the land farmable the way it is? Or because of the land around it being higher, if there's just no other way than to bring in the extra soil?
Through the chair to Councillor Day, the recommendation of Madrone and the QPs is that elevating the land would be an efficacious way of dealing with that problem. I can offer Madrone to comment on other methodologies that could have been applied.
Okay, let's ask that question of Mr. Lamamois. Sorry, I butcher your name. But you're from
That's okay, not a problem. Yes, sir. Yes, and you got my name correct. It's very phonetic, Daniel Lamponwa. Yes, explored other possible options to mitigate drainage on Mr. Sahota's land. However, due to the depressional nature of the parcel, being at a much lower elevation than areas surrounding. We have a rail line over to the south. We have a property over to the west where the elevation difference is several meters. Trying to incorporate more typical drainage measures, such as tiling or ditching, is not suitable for the property. Hence why the landowners also retained Geopacific to design a very comprehensive and detailed drainage plan that was included in the application package.
All right, I had a question of staff, please, Mayor Brody. On page 21, it says that the applicant's desire is to use Richmond soil where possible. Is this possible?
Through the chair to Councillor Day, it is possible to use soil sourced locally. The actual sourcing of the soil will occur closer to the date should the applicant be successful at this GP session. And in addition to that, the ALC has to make its final ruling as well. Should that be the case, then the applicant will require the review from a professional hydrologist regarding the source site, the determination of the volume, and then fees would be paid.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for the report, first of all, for staff and for the consultants. Extremely thorough report. And I do support the staff recommendation. So just a couple comments and a couple questions. You know, when I first started reading it, I did have many concerns and questions, but as I read through the report, it answers so many questions that most of them have been answered. And those concerns, you know, involve some of the inappropriate fill that we've all heard about from time to time. But this plan allayed all my fears on that. I think I'm pretty familiar with the area and the farmland there, so the idea of using fill to bring land up to make it farmable makes total sense. On days like today, for instance, there'd be no equipment working on any fields in Richmond, no matter what their elevation. So one comment too would just be, one of the reasons I had a lot of questions answered was because when it comes to the oversight, the inspection and enforcement protocols, for instance, on page 24 and 25, I have to compliment people on the thoroughness of those. I was very happy to see those. And I did have a question to staff. Are those protocols relatively new? Because I have a hard time imagining having any concerns if those protocols were followed in every single example or every single case.
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, these protocols are an accumulation of best practices, and they culminated recently in the Kavanaugh circumstance where a lot of these practices became standardized.
Okay, well, I thought they were very thorough. One comment and one more question would be just the rationale on page 52 and 53 I thought was very complete and very logical. It goes through on page 62 and 63 and 64 as well. So the monitoring and reporting of this, which has already been asked about, is extremely thorough. And I think making the application to the ALR is fine, and to bring the land up to a farmable elevation with the appropriate kind of soil, which is all laid out in the report, makes total sense to me. The last question would be, the 15 meters for the riparian area, is that a site-specific number, or is that some sort of policy that comes through the ALR? 15 meters for some parcels of land seems like it might not be enough in some cases, but it also seems like it could be too much in other cases. So where does the 15-meter number come from?
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, I'm not sure of the answer at the moment, but I can get back. I'll defer to staff, Peter Russell.
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, the setback was grandfathered, and it's based on the width of the channel, that the drainage system. So it's a wide channel at that point. So the riparian assessment area it starts at 15 meters.
Okay, so relatively speaking, it can be site specific then, depending on the water that you're talking about, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Last comment is just thank you for a very detailed, thorough report. I thought it was excellent, and I'll support the recommendation.
All right, Councillor Steves.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very, very familiar with this property. A longtime farm friend of mine, I guess they were there for a century, John Kaser, farmed in this vicinity, and another farmer farmed a little further to the east between the railway tracks and the river. Kaser was growing vegetables quite highly productive in the O4W soils, underwater in the wintertime. But when it dried out in the summer, he had them in raised beds or actually raised rows, and had a very productive farm. And so was the other farm to the east. It was, in those days, they had small dairy herds. 10 cows was considered a dairy farm. Now it's 600. But they shipped milk to the Fraser Valley and very productive. But over the decades, areas of fill went in and blocked the flow. And that area, the whole strip between the railway tracks and the dike, was a little lower than the rest of the bog, and we never had a proper ditch that ever drained it properly. And so they always had a flooding property going back 50 years. So when people put fill in, and sometimes generally illegally, they made it even worse. And I think we have to recognize this whole strip is going to have fill put in to make it workable again. It did work at one time. Because I witnessed it and I saw the farmers working there, but it certainly doesn't work now. And I think I support this report, and I think this is an example of what we're going to have to do on the entire strip.
Okay, Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple of questions, and after those, a few comments as well. So after thoroughly going through the report, which I appreciate the detail and the consultant's level of detail as well, I found lots of interesting tidbits, information in there. First question I have is to our staff. On our page GP20 at the bottom of the table number 1, there's an item called environmental sensitive area, but it's beside it just says yes, and then a blank. Whereas the one above it, riparian management area, it gives a bit of detail that there's no disturbance proposed. Could you speak to the disturbance proposed to the ESA? Thanks.
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, the environmentally sensitive area, the development of that is within the purview of the ALR, and I could ask staff Hopkins to comment further on that.
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, the environmentally sensitive area is to the southern portion of the parcel, and staff would review that through the ESA DP exemption. I believe you also had a question on the riparian management area and the disturbance to that area.
No, that part's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Through Your Worship, the staff. My next question was just referred to from Mr. Hopkins, which is on our page 23, which talks about the city's DP process for ESAs. But I'm a council liaison for the ACE committee, the Advisory Committee on the Environment. We've had some pretty short meetings where there's still room to discuss things. So I'm going to ask a little bit later on for an amendment to have this referred back so that ACE can have a say on the ESA, not just for this property, but like Councillor Steve referred to, the area is continuous along some of those southern stretches. My next question goes to the applicant or the consultant. The detail's not clear to me. But it seems like the whole property would be considered for the peat stripping and topsoil management and peat being dug up and laid next to it in a sequential way. Does that include the entire property, or is there a southern section close to this right away, the city's easement, that would not be part of that, where it would, is there any buffer room? Thanks.
Councillor Wolf, thank you for your question. I'll speak to that. The proposed plan is to strip the majority of the property, even towards the areas in the south, for stockpiling and reapplication of peat soils following the importation of agriculturally suitable soils in order to raise the elevation of the land to mitigate excess water.
Thank you for that. Through your worship, to follow up on that specific item, I appreciate the owner applicant contractor for mentioning in the report that there is intention to protect the right-of-way, the city easement, so there's no request to put fill over that. I would say that's probably the most important ESA component, but to hear that there's no buffer strip, that's an area of concern that we've heard in many similar projects to this, where we're allowing exclusion, but we're not having any restrictive amendments to protect what ESA is not about to be developed. So I really think having a look at how we can further buffer might be a way to go. Anyhow, moving on, I really appreciate in the report the photo evidence and the description from page 37, 38, 39. That's really comprehensive. I hear some of them mention the photos were taken and the details came from the summer, but I anticipate many of the other ones are the winter, where they're talking about a lot of cooling water. So I think that could be something maybe standardized for the future reports like that. Next one I have is on page 43.
Are you about finished because you've long since run out of time?
Then I'll speak more at council. Thanks.
Councillor Rao.
So, Worship, I'm very happy with this report and also the recommendation. And I just want to ask staff, now, this is an improvement of the soil quality to make it suitable to grow garlic. And if this is not permitted and remains as the 4W type of soil, what would be feasible to grow on the class 4W soil?
Through the chair to Councillor Au, perhaps this question could be directed towards Madrone Consultancy.
What would be the options?
I'd be happy to answer that. Yeah, thank you for that question. So typically for a 4W soil, vegetation that thrives on very poorly drained soils, for example, cranberries could be an option. One of the main issues, though, is machine trafficability. So although certain crops can grow in poorly drained soils, because of the extensive area of poorly drained soils, crop picking, managing the farm itself, and establishing typical farm operations throughout the entire year, and not just our typical wet season. So as our landowners mentioned, into spring and into summer, that would prove just exceptionally challenging from an agricultural perspective. So in terms of agricultural operations with this limitation, it's very, very limited because of the excess water.
Okay, and I noticed that on GP 70, it was mentioned that this was basically a wetland, a forested wetland, so it's not been used for a long time. So I think this is actually an improvement, so that it's really going to be productive.
All right, Councillor McPhail.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support the recommendation in the package, and just have a question in regards to on our GP 21 under the Richmond Food Security and Agricultural Advisory Committee, their motion that the city retain a portion of the 40,000 of the security to ensure the farm plan is implemented with a year of the project completed. Now on our GP 25 under security bonds, it says the applicant has been advised that a portion of the security deposit in the amount of $40,000 will be held until the farm plan has been confirmed by the agrologist as completed. So just through you to staff, is the 1 year not in there? Because I was wondering, as I read the recommendation from the Richmond Food Security, was that even possible? Was that even a doable time frame? So you see the difference? You see what I mean?
Through the chair to Councillor McPhail, yes, I believe there's a 2-year period, and then it would be, again, it would take in effect once the decision is made by the ALC. That's when that clock would start ticking.
All right. Thanks for that clarification. I appreciate it.
All right, do you want to move the motion then? Okay, so that's moved and seconded.
Second.
Okay, further discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? It is carried with Councillor Wolf opposed. Brings us to the Chimo Community Services, and we have Kathy Nackley, Manager of New Initiatives and Crisis Lines, who is available for questions. So let me just introduce this because there was discussion at the Community Safety Committee, and as a result of that discussion on this issue, there was a referral to staff to write letters or something. It was, with all respect, it was somewhat imprecise. We asked, and it was contemplated that we were getting a letter from Chimo on this issue, which you have in the package on page 121. And then there's further information on 123, and supplemented by the Crisis Center having given us some further information. But it's all the same. Well, rather than a referral to staff, I think we simply need to follow this letter, which is self-explanatory and is background. I don't think I've ever gotten a call of complaint or one negative comment about the great job that Chimo and their network does in relation to this whole issue. So what I think that the motion should be is that a letter be written, as it's kind of contemplated, to the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction, to the Minister of Health, and to our local MLAs, requesting that they stop the ongoing process to put these crisis services out to tender, delaying our important work and risking the introduction of more for-profit operators in the system, as well as the more significant concern of jeopardizing ongoing access to crisis service. And I'd make that motion. Second. So that's moved and seconded. I think they do, this group obviously does a terrific job. The need definitely is increasing. And with the need increasing, so does the attention to the matter and the resources being applied to it. But the idea that they have to go out for a request for a proposal and potentially get some other group, some other operator to do this, I just think that it's not commensurate with, it's not a reflection on the great job that has been done. And secondly, the special expertise which this group has to make sure that these needs are addressed for people who are in probably some of the most dire circumstances that we can imagine. So that's why I've moved it, and so it's moved and seconded. We've got a few questions. Councillor Al.
Your Worship, it's not a question. I just want to make a comment. Not only that, with the changes, the good work of Chimo and the other organizations would be wasted. I can also testify that I've seen this before. It was about 12, 13 years ago when the provincial government at the time also introduced a similar program for our FP, for counseling service. And at that time, it was really a disaster because we have other out of the province and other for-profit organizations, individuals competing for the contracts. And at the end, it did not work out. So I don't understand why the provincial government this time would do this again. And I fully support writing a letter and with a very strong voice to say that this is not a good idea. And we have to support CHIMO and other organizations who are already doing a good job. And I don't want the good work be wasted because of the change of policy. So I just want to say, yes, we should support them fully. And I've seen the disaster, the harm being done before.
Yes, I'm sure, right up front and close. Councillor Day.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brody. Well, I 100% support CHIMO and the amazing work they've done for decades. And I agree with writing the letter. I did have a question of staff, though. Is the reason the province is doing this potentially because there are areas where they don't have a great operator like CHIMO? So what is the motivation potentially behind this tendering process being suggested?
Through the chair to Councillor Day, staff have not had the opportunity to speak with the province, but this is something we can do if council wishes for us to follow up.
So just a question, Mayor Brody. Do we need to add a little thing to the letter, which is in situations like Richmond, where we have a bona fide, well-experienced operator for these kinds of services, that we request that we do not have to put it out to tender, so that if it is a disaster in other areas, we'll let that be the situation there. Do we need to mention that we're looking for an exemption altogether?
Well, from my point of view, I think it's a valid point. I just think that we should let them figure that out. I have assumed that part of the reason, at least part of the reason for them going out like this is because they don't want to sole source the contract, and they want it, to make sure that they're getting good value. But imagine what would happen if you have these international call centers. You could be speaking to somebody from 10,000 miles away. Yeah. And you could end up with that as your service because maybe they give a lower price. It just is incredible. Anyway, sorry I interrupt.
It's okay. I think we're all on the same page. I just wonder if this isn't an opportunity to educate the minister about how great things are going in Richmond, and rather than have a blanket policy for all of BC, maybe they should consider a more flexible situation so that people or cities, if the city council of any particular city is willing to say, we're okay, leave us alone, then maybe it'll wake them up a little bit and make them realize that, as Councillor Al pointed out, you could make it a lot worse.
Well, Claire Adamson, who has been doing some of the background work, I take it you're going to be involved in that letter, as will Kim Somerville. So let's just give that as direction, that to staff, to include that in the letter, and then once we've done the letter, we'll distribute the whole thing. Okay, Kim, is there anything to add to that?
Yes, Your Worship. In some of the correspondence that happened with CHIMO and with the province, there was a note that said that the reason the province was going out to tender was that they were looking for one service provider per health region. So currently there's 2 service providers to the Vancouver Coastal Health Region. There's one for Vancouver, and then there's one for Richmond, which is CHIMO. So it looks like that's what the reason is for them going out to tender.
All right. Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I feel very strongly with this, having had to deal with the aftermath of situations. And I echo everything that my colleagues have said and the good work of CHIMO, etc. But this is a mental health issue, and there are very few services for mental health, Your Worship. When people have to utilize this, it is as desperate as one can ever get, and the results can be horrendous. So I think, Your Worship, I won't say that the province is callous in what it's doing and how it's doing, but I think we need to also in our letter express the need to focus on services for mental health. And this is, as I said, a mental health issue, in my opinion, and it's not a service that can be sourced out. This is I'm sorry if you've had in, and I hope you never have to ever get it, but get into a situation where a person is considering suicide or whatever. It's not a good environment to be in, and I think you might feel the way I do, having dealt with a number of them over my career. So I would express everything, and I think we need to do it in terms of the context of a service, but I also think we should put it into our mental health aspect to emphasize how we feel and how we support mental health in our community and how we support CHIMO. And I wish every community in the province of British Columbia had a CHIMO and an opportunity on it. It's just like the national one that was taken out. Any line is valuable. That's all I'll say. So hopefully you will word the appropriate or use the appropriate wording on this one. Thank you.
Okay, doke. Councillor Hobbs, you know your camera's off, right?
I think my battery is dying, so you can give me a
There you
minute.
are. You're back on.
Okay. Thank you, and through the chair. Well, I support all the other comments from other councillors, and I'll just say through some firsthand experience in my career, and countless examples, sometimes where incidents worked out successfully and were resolved, many others that ended tragically and horribly. Often when they worked out, they were with the support of agencies, including CHIMO, which I've been a longtime supporter of. So I'm not sure what the origin of this effort is. It may be with the best of intentions by someone somewhere, but I think CHIMO not only deserves our support, but has actually earned our support. So I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Where it's not broke, don't fix it. So I'll call the question on the motion then, as requested in that letter, with the direction to for kind of more information in the letter. All those in favor? Anybody opposed? It's carried. All right. Someone move adjournment. All right. All those in favor.